Jan Airy, and I also want to welcome you to this group. It's wonderful that you're here with us. We decided that this important hour is one that was called for during the responses to the surveys we received through our National Benevolent Association connections in Older Adult Ministries. We heard from many people who said they were looking for ways to start a support group, perhaps on a particular topic or something that they were a little bit open to considering. And we decided that this could be a valuable way to help to offer ways to start that group. So first of all, thank you to Christy, who offered her introduction, who is our staff person with the NBA. And we're just so grateful to have the support of the National Benevolent Association in our denomination of Older Adult Ministries these last several years as we work together. So the other two speakers along with me are going to share part of our topic together. We all have some expertise in this area, but we also have a lot of ideas to share with you. So Reverend Kimberly Weir is in Florida. She is the Florida Senior Enrichment Center Executive Director and Chaplain, and also has been chaplain in hospital settings and hospice settings. And Pastor Sandy Roberts is in San Diego, where she just recently graduated with her MDiv in her seminary train, and now has been part of her congregation and formerly was the minister for senior address of program and other ways that you support those in her own congregation. And as I mentioned, I'm Jan Airy. I'm a gerontologist and a family counselor and coordinator of our Older Adult Ministries group. So I've been reminded recently that our Surgeon General has spoken many times about the pandemic that's extended much farther than COVID, perhaps, in terms of loneliness, especially with older adults. And with that in mind, we are seeking ways through support groups to emphasize a way to find less loneliness or to alleviate that loneliness. And so through our format today, we're going to share with you some ideas, some ways that you might choose to start, some of the ins and outs of how to do that, how to find the proper facilitator or guide, if that is yourself or someone else, and some of the ways that you might choose topics or resources. And we're here, of course, to help you. So at the end of our presentation, we will have a question and answer time for you to share with us. And then we will close with the offer of a resource listing, which will go to you by email after today. So you will have the additional contacts and resources in that way. But as we think together, I'd offer for you to just close your eyes for a moment and let's focus with some deep breaths on this comment, this statement from our Surgeon General. In essence, we are here to support each other through creating meaningful connections with individuals that make a difference in their lives and make a difference in ours. Amen. With those thoughts in mind, I'd like to invite Kimberly to start to speak with you just about some of the basics about support groups.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jan. So there, of course, are many different types of support groups out there. We are particularly focused, based on the surveys that Jan was talking about, we are particularly focused today on how to start a support group related to either grieving, or caregivers. So those are definitely our focus for this particular webinar. And so it might be good we thought it might be good to start with some definitions. So like, what is a support group? A support group, it brings people together who share a similar concern or type of experience that is usually challenging or difficult. So through this connection of getting together, we provide a safe space where we can build trust and provide an open environment for offering encouragement and comfort and wisdom. A support group is not treatment or formal therapy. Most of our groups will be led by lay people who are and not generally not trained therapists. And it's also support groups are not a place where we necessarily give advice. So we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. And then why start a support group? Well, we start support groups because we believe in a God of love who speaks to us and through us. We start support groups because we need to hear that voice and presence of God through each other, and to help get us through difficult and challenging life experiences. And support groups, as Jan just referred to, have significant benefits. And I imagine you could think of what some of those benefits are. But one, of course, is reducing feelings of loneliness and isolation. Support groups help people feel seen and heard. They can reduce stress and anxiety when we're able to talk openly about what's going on, and know that there's not any judgment there, and can say those things that maybe we couldn't say in other spaces. You know, it's helpful. It's helpful. We feel supported, and we can gain insights and learn coping strategies from each other. So that's some of the benefits. And, how do you know when to start a support group? When would be ideal? Well, I would just answer that when you feel the leading of the Spirit of God to offer care and support, and when you have a couple people, one or two people willing to facilitate and guide a group, then perhaps it's time to give it a try. You may know of several people in your congregation or in your ministry setting who have experienced a loss or who are in the midst of caregiving. And maybe they're struggling and you sense that they would benefit from being around others who have similar struggles. So those are some good reasons to start. So I think I have wrapped up my section. Does that sound right? And I am going to share my screen for a PowerPoint and give it to Sandy to take away.
Thank you, Kimberly.
Mm-hmm.
Here we go. So as Kimberly just mentioned, you determined that you have the need to establish a support group through various means. We know what a support group is, and it isn't now at this point. But now we hit the point where you have to worry about the logistics and kind of determine what will work best for your support group, how that's going to work and how you form it. So you have questions that you ask at this point. You start to determine, how often do you want to meet? Do you want to meet weekly? Do you want to meet twice a month? Do you want to meet monthly? There's different ways to do this depending on the need and the focus of your group. And then there's also where you're going to meet, how you're going to meet. Are you going to meet over Zoom, which is very good for people who are homebound? That's good. Are you going to meet in person? And if so, where are you going to meet? What kind of safe space do you have, an accessible place, and so on? And for how many weeks are you going to meet? You can have a set time frame of 6 to 8 weeks, or you can also form your group so that it's an ongoing sort of support group that's a little bit looser. So this also leads to determining how structured you want your support group to be. You can use a particular curriculum. There are curriculums out there for support groups. We will have some in our resources listing for you later. Bring in when a topic is something more than the leader has expertise in, like say, let's say financial issues or facility care, things like that. You can have guest speakers come in determining on what your group is asking for, what information that they are looking for. And you can also structure it so that you allow time to have input from the group. And the group will also help you determine do you keep working with the curriculum? Do you digress a little bit with the guest speaker and so on? And they will help guide you as you work through the more formal aspect of a group. So I mentioned here that we have two types of groups, at least, that you can look at. So the first one is the 6 to 8 week group format. Now that's, as it says, 6 to 8 weeks, a short, definite amount of time. And then your group will meet weekly for the designated number of weeks. And again, you can use particular curriculum, such as the one that we have here on the slide. And you can also have the latitude to create your own. And there's suggested topics that you will find in one of the handouts on the resource listing. And there is the flexibility in this one as well to do a combination of the curricula and the topic choices, and again, the guest speakers as you feel the need. And so it ebbs and flows, but you basically have this what I would call loosely defined framework around it that says this is the time that we have and this is what we're going to do, and you work with that. So at the end of the 6 to 8 weeks, you have a closing portion of the support group. You have a closing ritual that you do to say that we are done with this portion of the support group, that this group is finite and it is time to release us from the support group in that. Now, and going on, there is actually a secondary format, which is the ongoing support group format. And this may be the one that most people are familiar with. I know that I am. This ongoing support group format, it can meet weekly or every other week, depending on the needs of the group, on the ability of the facilitator to be there, and so on. Now, keep in mind that meeting for an ongoing support group format, meeting once a month is a bit too far apart in time to work with, because you need to have that more frequent connection in order for cohesiveness and trust to build in the members of your group. It takes a while. Sometimes it can take 2 to 3 sessions, but with an ongoing support or ongoing support group format, excuse me, you can have that latitude and that little bit of extra time to be able to build that cohesiveness and trust. In an ongoing support group format, as I mentioned, it's a little bit less structured. After the initial meeting, you and your group can choose the topics as the group needs come to light. Sometimes this may be surprising. In this case here, we're focusing on grief and loss and that type of support, but you will find out that something will bubble to the surface, or that somebody needs more information, or a group of people have started discussing a topic. And so you can start to pull in the resources for that and adjust the meeting as you go. And in this case, it's still good to get guest speakers to come based on the group's need. When you have the ongoing support group format, and being as it can extend out beyond what would be a more defined time format, over a period of weeks, it's sometimes good to have a guest speaker come in just to give space, just to hear a different voice, just to hear a different perspective on some of the topic being talked about. So that's one of the beauties of an ongoing support group format, is that it can ebb and flow as you need it to. Okay, next slide.
So how do you choose a good facilitator?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, are you feeling called to be the facilitator? God will lead you in that. Are there others who you may think of or that you could recognize that would be facilitators or leaders in an able kind of way? I love the idea that there may be two even different generations of people who are co-facilitators, so that they can share in that. And if one is absent, the other can take over in that. But as our slide says, the facilitator does not have to know everything. I would add that the person doesn't need to have a sense of being perfect, nor does that person need to have what we believe is an in-depth education on this topic, but mainly a person who is sensitive and caring, especially practiced at listening, able to discern and assess what people might be saying or what they may be commenting on, or even in their body language, what direction they may be offering. but also just ways that tact, diplomacy, and patience play into the role. One important aspect of all of this in being a leader is to be someone who has the patience to listen well, but also to anticipate what might be coming in terms of one person who may dominate the conversation. Sandy mentioned earlier, let's make that everyone has an opportunity to speak. And in so doing, I have an example for you. In a group that was a support group of caregivers offering support to a family member with Alzheimer's, there was one person in the group that had a lot to offload. She shared a lot of her frustration and a lot of her feelings. After the second session, where it seemed as though that was guiding our conversation, one of the other participants came to me and said, all of this offloading is really not helpful to me. What I am really looking for is some practical information and some examples that I can follow. So, with the help of the group and the agreement of the participants, we shifted the focus of that group into one where we offered information and resources and many other guides as well, as also allowing time for offloading. So the group should help to set the rules just as you begin. And as we've mentioned before, in terms of time, place, length of time, guidelines, and all of that kind of thing. Another aspect of all of that is an example that I want to share with you about a group that was sharing in grief together, having recently lost a family member or close friend. In that group, one of the women shared that she was still hearing her recently deceased mom's voice in her head, and we had reassured her that she would continue perhaps to hear that voice. What she said was, I can still hear her saying to me, Adele, tuck in your shirt. Well, we all gave a little smile, but she said, I always feel like I'm 7 years old because that was what my mom would say. And the deeper meaning of that comment led to a conversation and a discussion on that session about what we hear, what replays in our head sometimes is not particularly helpful, but we can't help it being there. And so we have to work our way out of the fact that some of the negativity in advice giving or in making us feel small or little or disempowered is a part of our process and is something that we need to think about. And so she gave us a gift in sharing that phrase from when her mom would say that and she felt like she was still 7 years old. Another aspect of the importance of the group facilitator is to talk about what topics we might cover, how we might discern what is needed or wished for from those in the group. And I just have a couple of hints that I have found worked well for me. First of all, is to listen well, to be a good observer about spoken and unspoken words and other messages that may come through, which can feel daunting. So here are a couple of other, I think, maybe simple ways to address that. One is to ask the group to ponder about a specific sentence that you might bring to them, like asking them what was a predominant thought in their mind this past week, and ask them to just have a discussion with you about that, and then listen carefully. Another suggestion that I found is to use a single word to open the session or to close the session with a word, like stillness, for example, and invite the group to consider how that sits with them. Does it feel comfortable or uncomfortable? What are the ways that they would wish for stillness to be found or not? And a third way is by offering information in the group that you yourself may have researched or that you have a speaker come in to speak about. One thing that's really important, I feel, is to offer a handout at the end of those highly informative sessions that give the information in a nutshell. People feel that they have something in hand to go home with and something that they can review and be reminded of later. Another way, of course, is to invite other speakers to come in. The Alzheimer's Association, for instance, is an excellent resource and very happy to bring speakers, come as speakers to a session with a group and bring many of their resources as well. So that's just another example of ways that you might utilize what is out there or ask one of us. So who should not be a facilitator or leader of a support group? Well, a quick story. A colleague of mine volunteered to lead a support group for caregivers. And in preparing for the support group and thinking about the content of that, she finds she simply could not do it. The reason was that her husband had recently passed away after several years of her caring for him full-time in the home. She was just too overwhelmed with her own memories and her own caring to lead the group. So we found some alternative ways for her to share her knowledge and her expertise on that. If the leader is someone who might lose track of time because they get caught up in the conversation or caught up in their own structure of what the group needs to be, maybe not such a good person to be the facilitator. Another is it can be challenging and embarrassing to have to interrupt someone just to say, let's listen to others, or let's hear your comment, and then invite others to see what they would say. This takes practice. It can be intimidating, but at the same time, a good leader is the one that feels called and knows how to ask for support and help from others. And Sandy, back to you.
Thanks, Jan. All right, so we've gotten this far here. We've determined the need for a support group, tips on starting your support group, the types of support groups, and who best to lead a support group. And we have some other general guidelines here that can be helpful when you're starting your support group. Next slide. So these are suggested. There are of course far more, but we can always start with these. Keep your group small. Limit the group to around 8 people if you can. If more start coming, consider breaking out into a second group. And the reason being is that a larger group becomes unwieldy and it starts impacting on the time that people have to share, to have discussion, and so on. It is actually also a little less stressful for people to know that they have the option for their voice to be heard in a smaller group. And Jan touched on this briefly before, but I can't stress enough that you have to set up rules at the first session. And the group can decide on the general rules together, but there are just 2 things that you need to do. And the first is to stress that this is a confidential space. This is a sacred space. This is a private space. And what is said in a room, in a support group, stays in that room. There's no exceptions. And so you have to not assume that people know that it needs to be confidential. You may have relationships within that group already pre-existing, or maybe they're used to chatting with each other, and you just need to double down and saying, what we say in here stays in here. And then the second thing to remember as you establish the rules at the beginning is don't give advice in the form of you should, because we don't know where somebody is. Even if they are sharing with us, we don't know where they are in their journey of grief, of loss, in caregiving. We don't assume that we know the depths of somebody's situation or their way of handling things, let alone what their family is going through. So You should is not something that you should be saying, as I just said it right there, but you get the point. All right, when you start your group, start with something inspirational, meditative, something calming to bring them in. People are coming in, they are stressed already. They have all this stuff that perhaps they've been holding inside for a while, or a recent loss. There's all sorts of things that'll be going on in someone's heart. So bring them into a space with a calming thing, such as a prayer or a poem, a meditation, something to gently bring them into that space of support to share. And again, in as before, you can use speakers. You can bring speakers for some of the topics. Um, you bring the speakers who are subject matter experts in their area. One of the best speakers I ever had in a support group format was the assistant district attorney of San Diego, because he dealt with things related to older abuse. He dealt with things related to like care facility issues. And it was really, really helpful and informative guest speaker. And he actually came back more than one time because he was just so informative and such a relief for so many people to speak with. So that is a good thing as a guest speaker. If we could go on, please.
Yep.
Okay. So we also need to in our groups, going back to remembering the 60 to 90 minutes format, we also need to be able to guide the session so that we allow the time for the participants, the caregivers in the group, and so on to share any urgent situations or needs that they're going through. Again, they're coming in with all this stuff rolling inside of them, but there may be something that has spiked to the forefront in the last week. So the facilitator needs to hear that, the group needs to hear that, so that all together we can determine what to address and also how to support this person. Again, as Jan alluded to in the leadership thing, you may have to redirect a caregiver, and hopefully gracefully in this. Sometimes not. Sometimes somebody else in the group may unintentionally redirect them, but you have to take hold of the people in a kind way, the people that are dominating the conversation. And so as somebody's going on, you can maybe insert something saying, oh, that's important, John, but let's see what somebody else thinks about that. Something to say, I hear you, but yet we're going to open up the space so somebody else has a chance to share. All right. Which goes to, you want to be sure too with your time that everybody present is given an opportunity to share. Sharing is not required by any means. You may have one or two people in the group that barely say a word, but just the fact that they are acknowledged, the fact that they are named in that respect in terms of being able to share that the presence is important, that is a crucial thing to get across to people as well. Again, we said keeping the group time to 60 to 90 minutes is a good thing. Just beyond that, it's taxing, and especially if your group tends to meet in the later hours, that's really tough on people. So keeping your group within a shorter time is a good thing. And as before, as we started the group with a prayer, with a spiritual practice to bring people into that space, we want to send them out of that space, out of a space that may call up emotions, that may be tearful, that may call up anger, all these other emotions that come in terms of the support group. You want them to come out of that space and back into life with a calmness. You want to give them that peace to go out back into the world. So you end again with a prayer, with a scripture, with another spiritual practice, something communal perhaps that we can all share together in this group, and then send people out with that. And so there are also some things to say and not say in groups. And Kimberly, I'm going to pass this one to you.
Awesome. Thank you. So I always find it interesting in one of the first sessions of a group, first or second, is to ask people who are there, what are some things that people have said to you that have been really helpful? And what are some things that people have said to you in your grief or in your caregiving role that are not helpful? And I always like to allow time for the participants in the group to come up with them. And usually they look a lot like this. So one of the things that I have found caregivers just sets them off in a bad way is when someone comes up to you as the caregiver and says, "Oh, your mom looks great. She doesn't seem that bad at all." And the person who's hearing that is like, "Oh, if you only lived in my home, you would know how awful this is." So unintentionally, this comment can kind of invalidate the caregiver's feelings. And like I said, it's not intentional usually, and you think you're being affirming when you say this to a caregiver, "Oh, they're doing so great." But in actuality, for the caregiver, that just kind of like, can really hit. For those grieving, these are all comments I have heard in my own grief that people have said to me in a card or in person. Well, at least your son is in a better place, or and at least you have another child, which is absolutely not comforting in any way, shape, or form. And especially in ministry and with churches, we hear that, well, God is in control, and well, God doesn't give you any more than you can handle. Again, whether you believe that to be true or not, it is often not helpful to hear as someone struggling. So anyway, I just wanted to throw those out there because they were kind of personal to me, and what I've encountered as I've led groups before. And I'm sure those of you on this webinar could add some to that. But I think that kind of wraps up what we were hoping to do in this very basic introductory support group webinar. There are so many more things that we could talk about, and about topics, but we wanted to leave a significant amount of time for you all who are here on the webinar to ask your questions and share your thoughts. And then we do have this resource page. I'll just refer to that real quickly, that you will get a copy of this sent to you. But these are some older adult ministry resources, some grief and loss resources, other support group resources that we have found to be helpful. I'm